We've all heard of the number one rule of diving. Frankly, I think there's a lot of rules that are important enough to qualify as the number one rule of diving. And I don't think I'm alone there. One rule that I hardly ever hear that I think is important enough to be one of the number one rules of diving is to know what you're breathing. Most divers don't learn about gas analyzers until they take a nitrox course. I mean, why would they? They're breathing air for their whole open water diver course. The only introduction, if any, in most open water diver courses is just to let your student know they shouldn't be breathing any kind of mixed gas without further training. Since many divers never make it beyond the open water diver level, it's no surprise that a lot of people don't even know what gas analyzers are. Knowing what you're breathing is absolutely critical to your survival at any level of diving. Different gases have different maximum and minimum operating depths, and some of them can actually be quite shallow. Breathing a gas deeper or shallower than it was intended to be breathed is a recipe for disaster. The maximum operating depth for oxygen, based on a 1.6 as the maximum ppO2, is about 20 feet. Any deeper than that, and you're at serious risk for oxygen toxicity. Convulsions due to oxygen toxicity aren't typically fatal on land, but underwater, if you start to convulse, typically the regulator doesn't stay in your mouth, and that can present problems. So why don't more divers own oxygen analyzers if they're so important? It probably has something to do with the fact that if you start looking around for a budget-friendly oxygen analyzer, you're often met with the number one rule of diving: don't hold your breath. There are a few decent options for budget-friendly oxygen analyzers. Most of them have some kind of drawback. One of them you even have to build yourself, which is kind of cool. But if you're limited on time or you just don't want to delve into that, then it's not a great option. There's usually some kind of oxygen analyzer available wherever you get mixed gas, like a dive shop or a fill station. I also work at a dive shop, so borrowing one has been pretty convenient for most of my career. However, a couple years back, I went on a dive trip, and when we showed up to the boat in the morning, the boat crew had forgotten their analyzer at the dive shop, and I started hearing them asking customers if anyone had an oxygen analyzer on hand. Not a good look. But that got me thinking about getting my own oxygen analyzer, because I wanted to be able to analyze at home before a dive. And also, I don't necessarily trust the dive shop to be changing sensors as often as they should. So I started digging, and I found an analyzer from a brand that I'd never heard of. But the price was right at $200, and I thought it would fit my needs. It also appeared that it might be compatible with the oxygen sensors that I use in my rebreather, which would be super convenient. In addition to that, it seemed like it would also work with some of the existing flow restrictors on the market, so I could actually connect the inflator hose from one of my regulators up to the analyzer and have a controlled flow rate for a more accurate reading. So if it does those things and it's reasonably robust, then we might have a contender for a good budget oxygen analyzer option. Enter the Forensic Detectors oxygen analyzer. Full disclosure, this product was sent to me for review, although I'm under no obligation to provide a positive review. This thing is pretty basic, but I sort of like it that way. It takes a fairly standard oxygen sensor. The internals are really simple. It takes AAA batteries. It's easy to use. It's easy to calibrate. Comes with a little orange plastic case, which is not the most impressive thing I've ever seen, but it does a decent job of taking hits for the analyzer when it's in your backpack or whatever. And it reads anywhere between 0 and 100% oxygen, which is good for a technical diver. So the first question you probably have is it tough? It appears to be ABS plastic, which is reasonably strong. However, I wouldn't bet on this thing being able to withstand a whole lot of damage from like drops and stuff like that. So as long as you're careful with it, it should last for a long time. The people at Forensic Detectors have been very responsive to my emails, which leads me to believe that it'll be easy to contact them if you have problems with the product. Another question I need to answer was whether or not it was accurate. So it uses a pretty standard galvanic oxygen sensor, so it's as accurate as that sensor is, as long as it's calibrated. Now, one thing that I noticed was that a lot of people were complaining that they were getting bad readings when they were using this thing, and I am inclined to believe that that was user error, because I have had no false readings with this thing, not even a little bit. Now, you can easily produce a false reading with an oxygen analyzer by having the flow rate too high. So if you're holding the analyzer straight up to a tank valve and you open the tank valve too much, then you're not going to get an accurate reading because the flow is too high. Put it too low and you're not going to get an accurate reading because there's not enough of the gas in the chamber. So if you're having trouble controlling the flow rate out of the valve with just the hand wheel, then I'd suggest some sort of flow rate restrictor. And the DiveSoft one that you can buy from Dive Gear Express just happens to fit perfectly. It slides right on, and with this adapter, I have had nothing but accurate readings. I've been comparing them against readings taken from a much more expensive analyzer, and they've been accurate every time. It's fairly well designed and easy to use. It's 2 button presses to calibrate, which is about as much as anybody could ask for. And out of the box, I basically immediately knew how to use it intuitively. Now, I have had a lot of experience with analyzers in the past, but I've also had a lot of experience teaching nitrox students, and I can tell you that my students would not have a problem using this analyzer right off the bat. It would be easy. One other thing that I wanted to talk about are replacement oxygen sensors. Obviously, you can buy these directly from forensic detectors, and you'll have the oxygen sensor that they officially endorse, and that's great. But if you're a rebreather diver that's constantly cranking through oxygen sensors, and you were hoping that there might be some use for these used oxygen sensors when you take them out of your rebreather before you throw them away, well, turns out there is. Because oxygen sensors in a rebreather need to be able to read a very high voltage, when they start to lose the ability to read those higher voltages, they become useless for diving or even dangerous for diving. But on land, they don't have to read nearly as high of voltages to analyze something like a tank of pure oxygen or 50% or something like that. You don't have to reach nearly those voltages. So a lot of times you can take spent oxygen sensors from a rebreather and throw them right into your oxygen analyzer. The most inexpensive oxygen analyzer out there is the one that Tony Land designed for you to 3D print. It's a bit of a project, and I don't really recommend that most people try it out, but the whole idea behind it was he wanted to be able to reuse the oxygen sensors that were coming out of the rebreathers down there. They've got a lot of rebreather divers, and these oxygen sensors are just getting wasted. So he designed this so that they could give out oxygen analyzers to their whole crew, homemade ones, which is pretty sick. So I wanted to know if I could use spent rebreather oxygen sensors in this unit, and the answer is yes, you can. It works just fine. It's a simple Molex connector. There's a little piece of plastic that you can drop down into the sensor to make it disperse the gas a little bit better. And as long as you do that, it works perfectly fine. I saw no difference between using the brand new sensor that came with the unit versus a sensor that was spent that I'd pulled out of my rebreather sometime before that. So it's because of all that I think this is a pretty decent buy for a budget oxygen analyzer. There are tougher things out there, but if you want to reuse your sensors and you want to use the DiveSoft QD flow limiter, I think you'd be hard pressed to find something better for this price. As long as you're reasonably careful with it, I think it's a good buy. If I have any problems down the road, I'll update this video with a pinned comment below and let you guys know what happened. But so far, so good. It's working fine. I'd like to take a quick second to thank DiveVibe supporters on Patreon. We couldn't make videos like this without you. We greatly appreciate your support. And if you would like to become one of DiveVibe supporters, then follow the link to Patreon in the description below. I'd also like to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Thanks for diving with me today, and I'll see you in the water.